I realized that my activism just works differently. My job is to help people to feel good about themselves in a therapy setting, and also to help people to recognize their awesomeness in a different way. But all forms of activism, I think, are necessary for any type of social change.
Hello, welcome to the Fourth Space podcast. In this episode, we're really thrilled to continue our collaboration with the Black Perspectives Office. The founding coordinator of the BPO, Annick Maugile Flavien, sits down with anti-racist psychotherapist David Archer for a one-on-one conversation about his ideas and his work.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black Perspectives Live podcast series at Fourth Space Concordia. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Black Perspectives Office, Fourth Space, and Concordia University are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. We'd also like to state that the Black Perspectives Office is informed by and stands in solidarity with Black communities in Canada and across the world who continuously fight against anti-Black interpersonal and systemic racism. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us for another episode of the Black Perspectives Lives in collaboration with Fourth Space. Today, we have a wonderful guest. His name is David Archer. David is an anti-racist psychotherapist from Montreal who has a private practice and provides consulting services for organizations and other therapists. In addition to being trained as a clinical social worker, he is also a registered couple and family therapist. His philosophies are informed by mindfulness, intersectional feminism, and critical race theory. Today, we wanted to have David in to talk a little bit more about his practice, as well as get an understanding of what it means to have an anti-racist framework in therapeutical work. So welcome, David, and thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So the way I like to start this, particularly because often we have students that are listening in, is to really get a sense of your parkour. How did you end up doing the work that you do, and what led you to your work in social work and the mental health sector in general?
For sure. Okay, well, first, I do have to say that even though, and I think many of the students know this, that even though this land is called Montreal, it's very important for us to acknowledge that the original name of it was Tiohtià:ke, and that name was given to this land by the Iroquois Confederacy, the Kanien'kehá:ka people. And the reason why I start with that is because, that's the context that we all find ourselves in, that we're learning, that we're teaching, that we're participating on stolen land. And it's very significant and very important to kind of highlight that even from the get-go. So when I was younger, I was raised up in this environment of knowing that there are Black people, that there are white people, that there are Native people, that there are non-Native people. And so I was raised in a place called Chateauguay, Quebec. And if you've never heard of this place before, that's okay. Many people haven't. It's a small town that's close to Montreal. And, but when I was younger, it was a bit more challenging to be in those types of spaces because there was always this understanding that there was Oka crisis, that there was a referendum. So there's always this idea of land being taken or being given, or whose land it was, who had a right to be in certain types of spaces. So, I had no choice. When you are a Black person brought up in this type of society, it's a political statement just to be a Black man. And it's a political statement to be a Black Anglophone in a largely Francophone province. So when we're talking about how I got to this point, I could talk a bit about my CV, but it was really that a lot of my decisions were polarity responses. It was people saying Black people can't do this, and then me coming from my Black Jamaican Canadian heritage, Jamaicans, we don't deal with those types of things. We won't just take that,
Mhm.
So my mother always had a belief that we were worthy of taking up space, that we were worthy of living and breathing in like whatever space we found ourselves in. So even when I didn't believe in myself, my family would. And so um, I originally was a software engineer for about like 10 years. And then after that, I decided, you know what? I'm going to try to take on easier problems. And I made the mistake of going into psychology. I was like, maybe I can solve human system problems. No, found out many years that that psychology was also very complex. But from my computer science background, I was thinking about logical ways of solving complex problems because the computer, although it's complex, it's usually going to have two ways of communicating, either on or off, or true or false. And so I was interested in finding out if we can also solve like problems in our human system in a similar way. So I studied and I got my bachelor's in psychology from Concordia, and then after that I did some teaching English. So I had a certificate to teach English, and then after I got my master's of social work from McGill, and then I got another master's from McGill in couple and family therapy. So I had an interesting path, but a lot of it really helped me to become the therapist that I am today. And I want to just say for anyone who's listening, is just to know, because I remember at those times that I was like, what do I want to do? What's good? What's the best career for me and all that? But what's interesting is that like every bit of knowledge that you acquire, it points you in the direction of where you're meant to be. And not all of the heroes wear capes, but also not all of your professors are in institutions. And so I found that through my life experience, it's like in a way, regardless of whether you believe in the universe or God, I think that it just like as I started to have more faith in myself and started to believe in myself, the path revealed itself. And so I
Mm.
started to find more efficient ways of being able to solve uh, complex traumas, and that's what led me uh, to kind of take this course of doing anti-racist psychotherapy.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. There's 2 points that you said that really resonated with me. One, this aspect of being worthy and how much um, the the fact that there are people behind you that believe in you and believe in your work
Mm,
and believe in your capacity really can change the entire parkour that is possible. Um,
100.
and so I just wanted to highlight that and appreciate you sharing that with us. And then there was another aspect that really, it's funny. I just recently wrote an article on my thoughts on systemic racism. And it's funny because
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about how you were coming from these kind of computer systems into these human systems. And one of the issues that I see a lot around this idea of the narratives that we have around systemic racism is that people are kind of speaking about it in a way that I think is a little bit too mechanical, almost as if it's like systemic racism is this like big machine and we're all kind of enduring it, um, while human systems don't really work in the same way, right? Like it's not exactly like this, and systemic racism is not just this machine that's functioning on its own that like we have no power in actually addressing, but rather that a lot of the reason that systemic racism is able to thrive in a lot of ways is because there's a collective complacency and complicity
Mm,
in it, whether that's conscious or unconscious, right? And
mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I really appreciate you talking about how these systems are different, right? And in a mechanical system, there's a bit of a true and false kind of going on, but in a human system, there's it's a lot more complex. But I also feel that it creates um, if we are willing to acknowledge the issue, then actually there's many opportunities and openings to address it because we are so complex and have different ways of thinking about the
Mm,
world and doing
mm-hmm.
things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's I think that like in our culture, we have a culture that does actually operate in terms of binary systems, in terms
Mhm.
of true or false, good or evil. And I think what we need to understand is that nature doesn't function always in terms of true or falses. And that when we look at things like war or white supremacy or patriarchy or sexism, these are actually artificial systems that we've implemented. These are like, they create pathogenic memories, they create suffering in our world. And
Mm.
so I think we have to be careful when we walk the line of either or, and we have to start to think about both and. So we have to be a bit more flexible. Computers are able, like, even though at the basis it's true or false, computers are capable of complex things. So I
Mhm.
don't see why we need to have systems that are so outdated. And this is 2021, and we're on Zoom calls using software with microphones, and like we're doing things that our ancestors never thought were possible. But I think we need to do the same with an update and upgrade of our social political systems as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think about that a lot, about how we're able to function as a society through a pandemic, and yet we still don't have solutions for racism. I mean, come on,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah, for real,
doesn't make any sense.
for real. And I don't mean to disrespect no astronauts or nothing, but like I do respect the fact that we can put someone on Mars, or put a robot, I think, put a robot
Hmm.
on Mars. But I'm still very interested in how we can get in touch with our spirits. I'm
Hmm.
still very interested in how we can start to learn to love ourselves. And I think the science, we're still trying to figure this out in psychotherapy. We're still trying to figure out the brain. And so, yes, there is this doctrine of discovery that exists in our culture of trying to put a flag and say who discovered what, and all that stuff. But I still do think that the most important mysteries, maybe they were solved at one point in our humanity, but from the limitations of our civilization on this side of the planet, we need to rediscover what it means to be more fully human and what it means to really love ourselves and to love one another.
Yeah, definitely. So, what does anti-racism then mean for you, and how does that inform the work that you engage in? I was, when we
Hmm.
met, it's funny because I've met a lot of people who do anti-racist work in general, and
Hmm.
there's an interesting pairing that I had never heard till we met, of anti-racist psychotherapy, which it seems like something that we should have been talking about for a very, very long time, but you're the
For
first person
real.
that really brought that to the table for me, and I'd love for you to kind of unpack that for us all.
For real. But although I'm the first like Canadian I've seen speak about these types of things, I mean, like Frantz Fanon is one of the earliest people who spoke about like just the like internalized oppression. He's one of the
Mhm.
first that I've seen, but there could be others beyond him as well. Like just because I wrote the book on it doesn't mean that I know everything about what's out there, and I'm still learning. I'm
Mhm.
still trying to figure it out myself. But what I will say is that anti-racist psychotherapy means taking down statues. That's what it means. It means that these things that we have put up from years ago that no longer represent who we are centuries later, that we need to update and upgrade them. We know that psychotherapy, a lot of it is founded on the basis of whiteness and on the basis of an expert knowing what someone who's not an expert should be doing or should be living. The reason why we say that, I'm not saying anything controversial, because the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, recently apologized for its role in systemic racism and all that. So I'm
Mhm.
not saying anything too controversial, you know. But what's funny, actually, if I can segue, it's like even 5 years ago, you couldn't even say white supremacy without people getting scared.
Mhm.
And now it's like, because this is the job of the therapist, is for us to speak about the things that do cause us pain and suffering sometimes. And medicine doesn't always taste good, but it's usually good for you. So any person who's listening to this and feeling like, what? He said white. He's not supposed to use words like that. Or what? He said white supremacy. You're not supposed to use that combination of nouns. It's just to understand that as a therapist, my job is to help people to bring the unconscious to the conscious so we can transmute it and heal from it forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so anti-racist psychotherapy it's strange that these things haven't been linked together, but marketers know a lot about therapy. I took a marketing class when I was I think I was in Concordia. Yeah, I was in Concordia at the time. I took a marketing class, and I was so impressed to find out that like they were studying the same things as psychologists were. It's like, what the? They take a lot from that. So if we think about politics too, I think that politicians also know a lot about psychology as well. And like media personalities, they know a bit about psychology. They know about types of words to use. They know about the types of images to put on newspapers when they want to pathologize or like say that people from different communities are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to say that we should be talking about mental health because it's a direct consequence from all these other systemic racist events.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about trauma, which is one of my interests as well, is that what a trauma is when something hurts you and you don't have enough resources to deal with it. So if we think on a different level, if we talk about poverty, what poverty is that there's a prevention from you being able to participate in a society, and there's a prevention from you being able to have sufficient resources to function and to participate in society. So mental illness then is that perception of adversity, and it's also the lack of resources to deal with it as well. So when we're talking about racism, we're talking about the prevention and marginalization of specific people, of saying that these people can't participate in our society, but we're going to make research about them. And we're going to teach in your textbooks why Black people are worse than white people at every chance that we have, so that we can maintain what is called the binary trauma complex cycle, which I talk about in my book. It's the idea that white supremacy is linked to Black suffering, and that Black suffering validates white supremacy, and that Blackness must become associated with trauma, while whiteness must at all costs be dissociated from trauma. So I know that's a roundabout way of explaining what it is that I do, but I just couldn't help but notice that the things that we're not talking about are the things we must talk about. Almost all of my Black clients have been impacted by how the society views them. Almost all of my white clients have been impacted by how the society views them as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to be like helping a woman who has a mental health issue and you're not willing to at least be open to talking about gender, then how can you really help the Black person or the person from a different country if you're not at least willing to admit that there is a difference of how their skin looks and what that means in terms of their ability to participate, their tendency to be prevented from participating in the society. So anti-racist psychotherapy was necessary. There's no other way that I can do it. There's no other way of doing therapy without looking at the individual and also deconstructing and rewriting the narrative of what it means to be a participating member of the society.
Thank you for that. I really, there's so much of what you're saying that's just connecting a lot of thoughts I've been having recently. I want to read a definition of ableism by Talia Lewis that I read recently. And so Talia is a Black woman who wanted to give a definition to what ableism is. And she says that a system that places values on people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, eugenics, colonialism, and capitalism. this form of systemic oppression leads to people and society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's appearance and or ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's so many links to what you were saying there that resonated for me in terms of what do we mean when people are able to participate? Whose responsibility is it that people are able to participate or not? And how that shapes the entire, world that we function in. And then, of course, has a deep impact on our mental wellness and the capacity to engage with the world, really, at the end of the day. And I feel like, like you were saying, like if we are in a system that won't treat a woman as a woman, right? And not take that gender consideration into the dynamics of what she's living, then in the same way, then we know that would be ridiculous, right? Like that would be seen as like, oh, that's so absurd. And then how then is it not taken into consideration in terms of race and other aspects?
You got it.
Dr. Myrna Lashley was at a talk the other day, and she had talked about internal resilience versus external resilience. And she was kind of speaking about how the difference of when people kind of impose their sense of what you should be able to endure or overcome, et cetera, being this kind of external resilience in comparison to your own internal resilience of what you think you're capable of, or kind of this empowering process of being able to overcome. And I wanted to bring that to the table to think about. There's I think there's one aspect of anti-racist psychotherapy that, like you were saying, that it really is taking in consideration the person's the identities and all of the social constructs around how they come to the table. But then also, I wonder in that how then in your work does anti-racism kind of function as also helping your clients kind of think through where do they foster their own sense of resilience in all of that, knowing that, the next day they're going to be out in the real world engaging with so many of these external factors. I think a lot about that is in terms of our Black students, of wanting to put resources at their disposal, thinking about the systems that we want to unpack and et cetera, but also knowing that day in and day out, they still live those experiences. And so how do we kind of foster that internal resilience?
It's a good question. One thing, though, that I want to add on, though, is that anti-racist psychotherapy and anti-racism, by definition, is going to need to be intersectional. So intersectional is going to mean then that the racism that is experienced by the Black woman is like kind of compounded with the sexism that the Black woman experiences. Intersectionality is going to mean that when we talk about femicides, we have to talk about Black trans women, that there's a higher chance of them being killed in intimate partner violence. And what I think, and the reason why I say this is because we can't say that any of us are free if we're not all free, because we're all family. All of us come from Africa. So even the white supremacist is really my cousin. Like, they're all related. Like, we all come from the same place. And I think that what we all want the same thing too. Like, the racist, so quote unquote racist person, just wants to be loved and respected, and wants to feel as if that they have a voice, and that what they say matters. The so-called oppressed person, whoever that is also going to want to have that similar thing of wanting to feel as if they are capable of having a voice, that they're capable of walking, of being safe in their bodies. And there's something, I think that there's a common thing that affects all individuals because, and I don't remember who was the person who said this, but I'm going to paraphrase it. When we look at privilege and when we look at what a ladder looks like, even if we say that white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered men are at the top of the ladder, the interesting thing is that there's no top of the ladder. So there's a lot of white men who feel as if they're not measuring up. There's a lot of white men who feel as if, for one reason or another, that they don't have the things they were promised by white supremacy. And so it's really to say that, like, it's like there's a lot of suffering that's going on with all types of individuals. And we need to think about these things outside of these binary concepts. So the approach that I use is based off of what's called EMDR therapy. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's based off of, it's one of the therapies that's very helpful for working with what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. So when we oftentimes are going to talk about trauma, we do not always talk about resilience. But in a weird way, the traumatic response that a person is going to have would have been adaptive if they had it in the past. So trauma and resilience are one. It's like they almost look like each other. Like they may not always look like each other, but the traumatic response that a person is going to have was meant to protect them. So what we are trying to do with EMDR therapy and other therapies that are based on memory reconsolidation is looking through, trying to find out all the injuries that might have happened based on the person's identity, based on their family history, based on the circumstances that took place in their society, in their family, and all of that stuff, in their relationships and all that. And we are trying to reduce the impact that the negative cognition, that the negative belief has on them and their relationships, so that we can reprocess it and bring in a more adaptive, positive belief. So the reason why I say this is because the only way that you can get to having the properly reprocessed material, the properly adapted belief about yourself, is by first confronting the suffering. So suffering and wisdom are linked in some way, that if we keep the suffering long enough, that is all that it becomes. But if we have the courage to actually confront it, then we can start to learn about ourselves. So at the same time, while we talk about, some of your audience may be aware of what's called vicarious trauma. This is the cost of being a therapist and listening to stories of suffering. This is the cost of being a Black person and watching television or internet videos that show Black people like yourself getting hurt by police and all of this stuff. There is a cost to witnessing suffering. However, there's also the concept of vicarious growth. So the reason why I do this type of work is because my clients have been my best teachers. I have met many people who believed that their life was at the end of the rope. I've met many people who felt as if the world had canceled them and that they had canceled themselves. And I've seen so many people turn their lives around that I have no choice other than to believe that everyone is capable of doing this if we have the proper technology and the sufficient knowledge and expertise at this thing. So I say all of that to say that EMDR is designed, there's specific phases that are part of it, but my work is designed to help the client to recognize their awesomeness. We cannot have people heal without them seeing that they are the key to their healing.
I love that. I've heard of EMDR quite a few times, and I appreciate you really breaking it down for us, because I think that for so many people's therapy, there's a lot of barriers to even, acknowledging that there's a problem or seeking out therapy or wanting to even find out what happens behind that door, right? It seems really daunting in a lot of ways of like, oh, what's on the other side of that door? And I think what you shared with us is such a nice glimpse of the capacity of the work.
Yeah, and if I can add another thing, it's just to say that, like, for anyone who's listening, we just have to rewrite our narratives about all of this stuff. Is that there's no such thing as a person who's broken. That stuff doesn't exist. And for anyone who's listening, just to know that, like, it's like I say this often, but sometimes I'll get some clients and they feel like their life is like a horror story or horror movie. And thing is, I'm not a big fan of movies. I prefer video games, but that's a topic for another time. But it's really to say that even if this moment right now seems like a horror movie, play out the whole movie, and you never know. Maybe this is just the plot twist. How do you know that it doesn't become a rom-com later on? And that's what we're trying to do with therapy. Ultimately, the goal of therapy is to help the client to learn. The therapist and the client are educators in the therapy room. Is that we are trying to help individuals to learn something, to recognize their capacities. And if we have the ability to sit with ourselves and to with mindfulness, which is just a way of being able to sit intentionally, of confronting your suffering and gaining wisdom from it. If we're able to do that, and if we have this proper space and the context for it, then we're able to heal from these difficulties. So anybody who's out there, because their mental health is more common than our society likes to believe, trauma is much more common than we like to believe. For anyone who's out there, just know that everyone deserves a second chance. I've seen so many people recover that I believe that we need to get more people into these fields to help other people to recognize their awesomeness as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So for EMDR, again, it's like it's hard to explain what these things actually are without going through it, but it's based off of the adaptive information processing model. There's 3 stages to the adaptive information processing model. One is that all people are capable of healing. It doesn't matter where you're from. Your body is predisposed to healing. If you've ever seen yourself get a cut or like a paper cut, sometimes after 2 weeks, you do nothing and it heals itself. Why? Because your body is trying to survive. Your body wants to heal. Okay? Same thing with trauma. It's an injury, but it's just an emotional injury. The second part of the adaptive information processing model is that sometimes when there's an injury that takes place, that's more than the resources that you have available, it's going to store this memory in this distorted way. It's called a pathogenic memory, so that when you're trying to access the memory, your body feels like it's happening in the present when it really should be putting all that stuff behind you. That's the second part. So that's how trauma gets stored. That's how mental illness gets stored. And the third part is that there are things that we can do. EMDR does it, different approaches use it as well. But there are things that we can do to re-engage the body's natural capacity to heal itself. And that's why EMDR is going to use eye movement. It's going to use tapping on different parts of the body. It's going to use audio, like there's music that my clients will listen to. There's many different ways of being able to re-engage that system. But the only way that we can properly re-engage our natural capacity to heal is if we have sufficient resources. Resources do not only mean money. It doesn't only mean friends. It means that infinite capacity that all people have of creativity in their mind. The brain does not distinguish between real and perceived threats. So if we imagine bad things happening, we feel pretty bad. But the brain also does not distinguish between real and perceived awesomeness. So if we're able to imagine like who we want to be, if you're able to imagine yourself walking across that stage, getting your diploma, then there's a positive feeling that happens in the body. The brain doesn't distinguish between that perception and the reality. So what we need to do, if we are playing it smart, is we need to understand how our brain works and use it to our advantage. So you want to feel good when you are thinking about your schoolwork. You want to feel good when you're thinking about like what it means to be a Black man. You want to feel good when you're thinking about what it means to be a Black woman, non-binary. You want to feel good when you're thinking about the fact that you have the miracle of life like right ahead of you. So um, I don't know who that intervention was for. I hope that helps somebody, but I really just want people to know that like it's not only about I'm glad you mentioned that. It's not only about trauma. It's about us like honoring our ancestors, the difficulty they went through, and knowing that they are also pushing us ahead as well. They may be behind us, but they didn't leave us behind.
Yeah, I love that. And in the ways that I think about it often is that we need to kind of pull away from this linear timeline, right? So like my healing heals my grandma, whether my grandma's here or not, right? Like there's a continuousness in there and
For real.
our lived experiences.
100%.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your book? You had touched on it quickly earlier, but so David wrote a book called Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, Confronting Systemic Racism and Healing Racial Trauma. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So the thing is that like for me in this book, what had happened was that like many of the listeners, like the police murders that happened in 2020 and are still happening, these things they left me with a sort of rage and anger and frustration. And I realized that this rage and this suffering that people feel when we watch other people suffer, uh, it's capable of being toxic if we don't do anything with it. But anger is a useful emotion because it mobilizes people. And so while I do give all respect to all the activists that go out on the street and they protest, I realize that my activism just works differently. My job is to help people to feel good about themselves in a therapy setting, and also to help people to recognize their awesomeness in a different way. But all forms of activism, I think, are necessary for any type of social change. But for me, I realized that I was frustrated because I wanted to try to understand why racism happens. And in my book, I kind of explain like how racism functions as a system. So it's not just it's not a question of like a person just being like, I use the N word, or they like paint themselves with blackface, or any of the other ridiculous ways that you're going to see that these strange things happen. But it's to understand why that happens in the first place. So in the book, I do speak about delegitimization, which is a necessary part of any type of subjugation. And in the book, I spoke about the binary complex trauma cycle, which is just to say there's a balance between white supremacy and Black suffering, and that it was something that was created, didn't always exist. In fact, I mean, if you just think about it, many Black people only become Black when they come to this country. If you're an African, I don't know if the person who's raised in an African country is going to see themselves as our kind of Black. I'm putting air quotes for people listening on, on the radio or whatever. The thing is that when you're in a different country, you may see yourself as dark skinned, but when you come here, you're Black. And when you go to the United States, you're Black. And so I was trying to find out why is that? And I was trying to explain or trying to understand what is the impact of racial trauma. And so the book is it is a book that's for people who are scholars and people who want to understand this at a high level. It's a well-researched book. And it's also to say that I was very interested in trying to find out how to reduce the impacts of racial trauma and how to get people to heal from it as well, using memory reconsolidation approaches, because memory and history are very important to our healing, both on the individual level and also the social level as well.
I really, that is such an important part of what you said there, on the social level and on the individual level. And I think from my background and the work that I've done in my lifetime, I often think about that on the community level of how do we move towards community healing, particularly as you said, right? A lot of our community members are coming from different places in the world, different kind of constructs around race, and how that then has to like merge in this space. And we may not agree. We may have difficulty within our own communities and aspects like that. And I guess that brings me to one of the last questions I wanted to ask you before you kind of share any last thoughts of what do you hope to see within the Black community and the mental health sector in terms of your work? How do you think this is going to impact our communities and our ability maybe to move towards this sense of community healing?
Oh, yes, that's an interesting question. I do think that, like, for me, I feel as if, like, I've seen some of the most beautiful things happen. So I don't do this work for myself. I really think about the David Archer that comes after me. I think everything that I get in this lifetime now is just bonus points because I've seen too many beautiful things happen that have restored my faith in what people are capable of. Of course, I'm discouraged when I see ridiculous things or ridiculous presidents or prime ministers or premiers and all that. But the thing is, because every nation has is struggling and is always in these types of struggles, because the idea of a nation and country doesn't even really make sense. There's no actual physical lines. All of the countries are social construction as much as racism is, but this is going a bit too deep. Let me return back to the question.
Are they ready for this conversation, David? Are they ready?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Is that I'm a therapist, okay? My job is to listen to people. So when I get the chance to talk, then I gotta talk. So what I'm trying to say, though, is that I think that what we need to do is we need to upgrade our technology. I do not believe that people really understand that the goal of therapy should be to make it so that there's no longer any therapist anymore. That's what the goal should be. The goal of policing should be to make it so there's no longer police. It shouldn't be that we're doing jobs that are just responding to trauma. It should be that we eliminate trauma. That's the goal. The goal is to make it so that traumatized people no longer traumatize other people. That's what the goal should be. And because we are so limited in our old perspectives of how things are, we don't dream big enough anymore. So what I would love to see is for people to start dreaming again. I'd like to see people, start to think, like, how do we make it so that Black people heal themselves? I'd like for people to start to think of how do we make it so that we can find ways of honoring our ancestors. I think a lot of the things that we're doing in the present day in terms of polluting the water that we're supposed to drink, it's crazy, in terms of polluting the air we're supposed to breathe. I just feel that a lot of the things we're doing are not logical. I think that a lot of the things we're doing they create suffering and we don't gain wisdom from it. But I would love for people to start to think about how do we eliminate poverty? Because if you eliminate poverty, you're going to reduce significantly all adversity. And if you eliminate adversity, you're going to reduce the incidence of mental health and trauma. So what I would like more than anything is for people to not see my work, the work I've done so far, as the end point, but it's just an entry. It's just an entry point. It's I'm very interested in seeing, and honestly, I'm interested in how do we eliminate suffering, the racial trauma specifically, from the world. And how do we do that? And so then I wrote a book about it because I'm trying to find out about it. And how do we make it so that we get better therapists? How do we make it so that we remember that like that our ancestors, when people will say, I'm my ancestor's greatest dream, that's a lie, because our ancestors were so resilient to go through what they went through, and that we're here. Oh my goodness. Like there's so many of my ancestors that are just lost in history. Like I'd like to see that we really understand that Black history doesn't start with being relevant in terms of white people's eyes. That Black history starts before there was European civilization.
Yeah.
Like what I'd like to see is that we recover our memory and that we reprocess it, and that we have the same courage that my clients have. That my clients, they will come to me and say that they suffer and they're honest about it and vulnerable. And then through their courage of being able to say, this is the difficulty I'm going through, that they can end up starting to also see the bigger picture of seeing where they came from, of seeing that they are also beautiful people, that they have strong spirits, and that, you know, that they're, yeah, that they're doing the best that they can, and that they're worthy of respect and worthy of love. And yeah, that was an essay form question. So
no, I
gave
loved
an
it.
essay form answer. So
thank you so much. I really, so much of what you said really resonated for me. And I think that, yeah, I agree that we have yet to even scratch the surface of what is available to us, what the dreams actually were. And I think that that's, at least in my own personal journey, as well as the work that I do with the Black Perspectives Office, and is really about, about allowing myself to dream beyond what was told that we can dream about.
For real.
The Black imaginary is so ample, and I live with my son and my mom, and they're both in these really interesting spectrums of, my son has not kind of entered the social construct yet. He's been largely at home and is kind of hidden away from that in a lot of ways. And then my mom is at a point in her life where she's like, I just don't have much time or energy and patience for any of it anymore. And it's really interesting to see how they dream individually, but also how they dream together in ways that because I have to function in this, the day-to-day of the social construct.
Yeah.
And so,
there is Isn't the world a beautiful place?
Mm-hmm.
It may not always be pretty,
but
it's always beautiful to me.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Well, thank you so much, David. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I am excited to have you join us many more times. I think that this is really just the beginning of many conversations to come. There's so much for us to learn from your perspective, and also the work that you've done of really taking the time to put paper to pen, right, about these aspects that you see. I think that oftentimes, because of our different positions in the world, we may have privilege to knowledge and information, and we can hoard it, right? A lot of people hoard that and don't necessarily feel compelled to share. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate the fact that you've been so generous with the world.
Well, thank you. And also thank you for your work as well, because when I was at Concordia, I don't remember them having like the Black perspectives. I don't remember. The only Black perspective I saw was when I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't. It's like, what?
Oh, hey, me.
Okay, so like that's why I want to thank you so much for your work, and just to know everyone's contributing in the way that they can. But I think we just need to try to find out a way to make this world a bit more loving, a bit more compassionate. And, it's one person at a time. And it's not only just the words that are in a book, it's also the actions and also our commitment to seeing a better, more love in the world. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and many blessings and strength to everyone listening to this.
Thank you. Actually, before we jump off, is there a website, social media, anything of the sort that you would like to share if anyone wants to?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you can hit me at I gotta sound hip. Let me sound cool. I just recently joined Instagram. Yeah, I just only recently joined Instagram. People are like, yo, how old is this guy? So at anti-racist psychotherapy, And my website is antiracistpsychotherapy.com. And if you go on that website, you're going to find links that you can get the book. And on that, of course, and some people who are like, what? I don't want to get it from Amazon. Okay, that's cool. Go on that website. You're going to find one of my favorite Black bookstores, a different book list, Canadian Black bookstore. They also have it. You can get it from there too. It's available in paperback, hardcover, and also audiobook is going to be coming out in a few weeks as well. Yeah. I did it myself. Yeah. So yeah. So you get to hear all my strange voices, all my hijinks of David Archer. Well, thank you. I think again is that God puts us in positions that like this is the way that I could help people, and so like also like on the website, if there's anybody who's interested, I'm also going to be doing a training in EMDR, teaching people how to use EMDR. But you do need to have a master's in social work, or you need to have a psychotherapy permit to do it. But I'm going to be doing the first training that I've seen in Canada. Well, not in Canada, but I'm going to be doing my first training, and it's going to be an international thing. So I'm working with Americans, they're working with Canadians, and but besides that, anti-racist psychotherapy. There's a Facebook. I'm going to be working on. There's a Facebook public profile, David Archer. I think that's all my spamming. I think that's all my information for now. But yeah. And anyone who reads the book, I'd love to hear what you think about it. But thank you so much. Many blessings, and everyone just stay safe and healthy and happy.
Thank you for listening to the Fourth Space podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at CU Fourth Space, and wherever else you find your podcasts. The podcast is hosted by me, Douglas Moffat, and produced by Annick Maugile Flavien. Editing by Chloe Lalonde and Mackay Hallgrove. Social media and web support by Kari Balmstead. Our theme music is courtesy of Supercontinent. Thanks for listening.